But she spoke openly to patients, to doctors, to nurses, to anyone who was viewing the television reporting about the murder of President Kennedy. She was talking about it in terms of like, this is where it's going to happen. They're going to kill him, etc. So and of course, after it all happened, Frugier was all hot to get back with her. In fact, he contacted the hospital, and unfortunately, Mother had already been released from the hospital at that time. I don't know exactly what happened. I'm sure she was worried about what she had shared openly, because people get eliminated for sharing that kind of information. But there are several reports from physicians, nurses, etc., about Mother's verbal warning to everyone who was within the sound of her voice at the hospital.
So she sounded the warning call for sure, and that's been backed up. Now, as your mom went to the Silver Slipper Lounge, there are two men that were said to have been in the car with her. I don't know if you're comfortable mentioning the names of who we think that might have been. Is it okay to go there, or should we?
Absolutely. I'm not worried about those names at all.
Well, the one of the two that jumps out at me, I did some research into Sergio Aracha Smith. And, people have diluted so much of what actually happened and is provable. But when you go back now, most of our audience knows these characters, but David Ferry was said to be a possible backup getaway pilot. He was involved in this up to his neck. He had a strange suicide right after the Garrison probe was announced in public. He said, paraphrasing, "I'm a dead man after this." Right. And he was. And within 24 hours, another gentleman they were looking for was dead as well of unnatural causes, such as a machete splitting his skull open.
Yes.
But I digress. But Sergio Aracha Smith actually had helped David Ferry fight being released by Eastern Airlines back in the day when Ferry was a pilot working with, Guy Bannister still. Guy Bannister also defended him. He had 544 Camp Street, former FBI man. Now, if these guys didn't know each other, what were they doing defending David Ferry, in his case, which was quite sordid with the, the CAP unit down there teaching youngsters to possibly someday be in the military and be flyers. So he headed this CAP unit. He had like a laundry list, we'll call it, of alleged pedophilia. And these two guys are backing him up. Now, if we fast forward to the two gentlemen who were supposed to be with your mom that weekend of the assassination, one of the names comes up is indeed Sergio Aracha Smith. Yes. Now, what do you make of that when you string all of that together? It blows my mind, but more importantly, what do you think?
Well, it does blow my mind too, Bob. Actually, the other individual was Emilio Santana. Smith and Santana were the two men identified to Frugier by I guess you would call it the manager of the Silver Slipper, Mac Manuel. Frugier showed him pictures. He immediately picked out the pictures of Smith and Santana as being the two men who came into the Silver Slipper with Rose Jeremy. And all of these guys, as you mentioned, Smith was known to being a part of the anti-Castro Cuban refugee revolutionary front out of New Orleans, directly connected with Ferry, Oswald, Guy Bannister, and the like. So it is stunning when you piece all of this together years later. The fact that Mother was with Santana and Smith does kind of blow my mind. And of course, all of their interconnectedness is astounding, even still.
And then we put, the prediction she made in conjunction with this, that a seasoned officer like Frugier was about to bring her down to give her story and testify. Now, as he offered Frugier to bring her down and she's on the plane, she sees the newspaper, she talks about Oswald and Ruby knowing each other. What is the reaction, on Frugier's efforts? Okay, I have this witness. I'm a seasoned officer. used to dealing in the drug trade. I'm used to being able to decipher which stories are true and not. I think she's important. She predicted this. I'm going to fly her over to you. What was the reaction to his efforts?
Well, oddly, Bob, as you know, nobody cared. Frege went out of his way to report the fact that he had Rose Jeremy in his custody and that she had information, direct information about this threat, which has all come through. And of course, the people, even in the Dallas Police Department, Bob, help me remember the head of the Dallas Police Department who said we really don't care anything about.
Was that one Will Fritz?
Yes, Will Fritz. Thank you, Bob. Captain Fritz said, look, we already have our man. We're not interested in sharing me at all. And so that right from the very beginning should be some kind of indication to us that foul things are underway. Why would you not want to talk with someone who seemed to know all about this well in advance? And of course, many years later, we all know that it wasn't part of the desired scenario or narrative for them to talk to anyone who knew anything other than the story that they wanted presented.
Mind blowing. Okay, so he's ready to bring her down. We could have this witness. All of this was shut down.
Yes.
Incredible. Now, as you start to investigate this as a son, my heart has bled for your efforts, as a friend and what you've gone through. You've handled it as a gentleman. You've handled it as a man of faith. You've handled it with grace. Now, I just ask, you then pursued, as an excellent son would, you pursued what had happened to her, and later you came to find hospital records kind of at the 11th hour, so to speak, of them being able to be found. Could you talk about a little of what happened to your mom, which aches my heart to ask you about? And in the second part of that answer, how did you later find extra hospital records that question the story?
Well, yes. Let me preview or say in advance of answering your question about that I was in my early 20s when I first learned of mother's involvement in all of this. I was a young college student at Baylor University. I got a call from one of my aunts and uncles who lived in North Dallas that they had in turn received a call from a man who wanted to have a meeting with the family to talk about some important aspects of mother's life and death. And those people turned out to be led by Gary Shaw. And that was the first time I met Gary Shaw and the first time that I learned really anything about the mystery of mother's death. You have to understand, mother died when I was 12 years old. And I only saw her 3 times that I remember during those 12 years, including her funeral. And the conversation about mother's absence and what was going on in her life was hush, hush, to say the very least. And I guess I'm certain that those people in my family who truly loved me were trying to keep me from a lot of the ugliness of her life. But in the long run, it would have been much better for me to have known more and more truth little by little, not as a 12-year-old child, but the time I was in college, even after I had this meeting with Gary Shaw with my family, they didn't follow up and provide information with me. But later on, Bob, at the time, life was very busy for me. I was a young college student. I was soon to be married. My life took its own route. And it really wasn't until I was in my mid-30s that I became, completely enamored with knowing as much truth about mother's life as possible. Bob, I think I'm omitting some of your question. Can you remind me the second part of your question?
No, as you went in, now you found out you've been looking into your mom's death. It didn't come to you later. It came to you later in life because your family, understandably, sheltered you from a very painful situation. I mean, just to set it up, I hope I'm helping in your description, but your family, by bringing you into it, would have brought up a lot of painful issues with your mom, which might have distracted you from your studies and your life. And on the other hand, it's also bringing up the Kennedy assassination, where a lot of people are said to have met very strange deaths. So,
Yes.
So they sheltered you from that. But then at a point, Gary Shaw, the excellent researcher and a good friend of yours, came and he asked questions. And through his questions, you learned more about your mom. He told you more about your mom. Now you're starting to want to look. Through the road with Mr. Shaw, you discovered quite a bit. And then after that, you guys were led to find some documents that questioned, how long your mom had been lucid and alive in the hospital when they had said she was DOA. So I didn't want to lead you too far in that answer, but I think that's a very interesting track.
Yes, it really is, and thank you for the redirect. When Gary Shaw and I have been in touch with each other ever since that initial meeting, and as I became older and desired to go deeper and deeper into finding answers, he was always there for me. And the time came to where I wanted to get my hands on the actual medical records that were still available, believe it or not, at the hospital in Gladewater. And so Gary Shaw and one of my friends who was a lawyer, my personal lawyer, we traveled to Gladewater to the hospital there and went about the process of trying to retrieve these records, which under most circumstances, the sole son of anyone should have easy access to such records. But that's not what we walked into that day. In fact, when I showed up at the records office at the Gladewater Hospital, everyone in that office there seemed to be very shaken that I was there and asking for these records. Immediately, they put me off for a few moments, even to help with my lawyer and Gary. They said, look, we're going to have to go through some administrative processing. They made phone calls to upstairs offices, and we literally went through over 4 hours of waiting to even get our hands on these documents. At some point, I actually thought that they weren't going to give them to us and that we were going to have to actually go to court to get what was rightfully mine as her sole son. But the real interesting aspect about this, as in most hospitals, of course, today, most records are kept on the computer, but at the time, people had files and they were kept in file cabinets, alphabetized for easy reference. Well, it was really strange. When I finally got them to let go of those records, the person who was working in medical records proceeded not to a file cabinet, but to a desk, pulled the desk out from the wall and retrieved mother's records in a file that had been hidden behind the desk. Now, even then, I knew something had to be wrong and some reason for those documents being hidden. And as I started to study them, Bob, as you know, over a period of probably 10 years, I conferred with at least a dozen medical doctors, asked them to read the handwritten, typed hour by hour record of what occurred in the hospital. Now, remember, mother's death certificate says that she was dead on arrival at Gladewater Hospital. These records proved that was a complete lie. Not only was she still alive when she arrived at Gladewater Hospital, thanks to the loving care of Jerry Don Moore, she was given medical care for over 8 hours in the hospital before she died.